Welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on religion and society, in today's lecture we are going to discuss Emil Durkheim's The Elementary Forms of Religious Life. This is part of the syllabus of BA multidisciplinary course taught in the second semester, and this reading is prescribed in the syllabus. In the first half, we discussed about how Durkheim critiques the existing anthropological theory and arrives at the idea that to understand religion in the most simplest form, we need to study the totemism, and for his research he kind of selected the Australian origin, which was a clan based society. Now in the next chapter he kind of gives us a clear cut explanation of the principal totemic beliefs, and here he kind of clearly marks out the fact that the totem is not just a symbol, it is a name and an emblem. And from there the basic totemic principle would arrive that it is the invisible force that kind of marks the emergence of sacredness when individuals are in a collective. So, let us kind of understand the principle of totemic belief. In the elementary forms of religious life, Emil Durkheim explores the very essence of religion, not to debunk it, but to understand its functional role in holding society together. He argues that religion is fundamentally a social phenomena rather than a supernatural one. In Durkheim's framework, the totem is the key to understanding how society creates the sacred. He argues that totemic belief isn't just a primitive superstition, but a sophisticated system of social classification. So, as a kind of belonging to the positive view approach school, Durkheim was using comparative method and classification, and he divides the entire society into kind of sacred and profane. And for that matter, he says all religious phenomena can be divided into two classes, that is beliefs and rites. So, the two pillars of religion according to Durkheim are these two inseparable components, and the first is the intellectual conception, that is the belief. What are belief? Beliefs are states of opinions, myths and dogma that represent the nature of sacred things. And the second pillar of religion are the ritual practices, and these are termed as rites. They determine modes of action and the ceremonies directed towards those sacred things. So, you have a whole set of ideas which are kind of connected to your religious belief, and to kind of bring those ideas into actions, we do ritual, we have certain modes of action. So, both are kind of two sides of the same coin, but for Durkheim it was important to first understand the ideas, the beliefs, before we could understand the modes of action. For Durkheim, the two elements did not exist they have influenced each other and shape one another. So, when he looks into the beliefs and rites, he argues that while principles are derived from beliefs, a separate study of rites remain indispensable for full interpretation. So, for the direction is from beliefs to rites, first you study beliefs and then to the rites, and here then the rites are in principle derived from beliefs. You act because you believe something is sacred. So, your mode of action is dependent on your belief. He argues that while principles are derived from beliefs, the second part is that the direction is from rites to beliefs, and here the cult or the ritual reacts upon the belief. So, it is a kind of a two-way flow. When we look into from beliefs to rites, first we understand our belief and when we act, but the other way around is that it is the rituals are an reaction to the belief system. Myths are often created just as to explain a ritual whose original meaning has been forgotten. And then there is kind of a connection between the two. Some beliefs only became real or manifest through the act of the ritual itself. Now, first thing that he does a classification, and the second, when we come to the idea of understanding the totemic principle, the methodology that he adopts is to focus on the elementary ideas. Durkheim establishes that his goal is to uncover the fundamental structure of religion rather than getting lost in the complexities of specific cultural myths. He intends to bypass the speculative byways and luxuriant detail produced by mythological imagination. While he will use myths to help clarify fundamental notions, mythology itself is not his primary object of study. He argues that mythology is a work of art and a complex problem that requires its own specialized method and study. Having decided to focus on the ideas or beliefs first, he identifies exactly where he will begin his investigation. Among the various beliefs in totemic religion, those concerning the totem are the most important. Because these are the most foundational beliefs, he concludes that his study must begin with them. Thus, elementary idea or the basic ideas are more important than the complex mythology. Totemic beliefs are the most elementary, so the study begins here. Therefore, he selects this idea of going and studying the primitive society who have this belief of considering the totem as sacred. However, we move to the totemic species, he also discusses the hierarchy of totemic species. Durkheim observes that while almost anything can technically be a totem, there is a clear preference for living things over inanimate objects. Animals and plants make up the vast majority of totem. Out of over 500 names listed by researcher, Howitt barely noted that there were only 40 and others were 40s were plant and all the others were animal. So, in a sense is saying that animate objects were kind of given more preference to be selected as a totem, and in the animate objects it was the animals which were first selected and then it was plant. So, a totem could be a symbol of any plants, animal or any other object which was kind of worn by the tribes on their body, on the outside the house, on their tools and weapon. Now, this symbol was known as totem, which was of an animal or plant which was considered as sacred by that particular clan. So, inanimate objects and cosmic phenomena were rare category, and some of the totems were represented by clouds, rain, sun, moon and star. Rain is noted as the only common exception among the cosmic totem. Now, when we look into the classification of totem, he says that there are certain normal totem, but they are also abnormal and mutant totem. So, he identifies variation that derives from the standard whole species model. He argues that these are not distinct type of religion, but rather mutant forms of same primitive notion. And what are the mutant or the abnormal one? First is parts of object. Sometimes a totem is not an entire species, but a species part of one, such as the tail or stomach of an opossum. The fat of a kangaroo is often occurs in tribes like Arunta or Loritza, where clans have been subdivided. So many times the totem themselves had to be broken to provide new names. Then the second kind of variation is in terms of the geographical and individual objects. In rare case, a totem is a singular unique rather than a species such as sun, the moon or specific constellation. A specific depression in the terrain or a particular anthill, that is a geological feature, could also be selected as a totem. Durkheim explains these are usually linked to the myths when an ancestor is said to have performed a legendary deed at the specific site. And the third category is of the mythical ancestors. Occasionally, the totem is not a real thing at all, but a mythical being. Despite this irregularity, Durkheim maintains his original definition of the totem. He believes these variations are secondary and do not represent a different kind of religion, but rather the primitive totem species model that has been altered by social subdivision or the growth of mythology. Emile Durkheim's study, he expands his analysis of totemic religion by examining the social organization of clan and the rules governing how totemic names are transmitted. Durkheim notes that the way a totemic name is acquired relates more to the sociology of the family than to religious sociology. He identifies three distinct rules for transmission across different Australian tribes. The first rule is the maternal line. In the majority society, the example that he gives is the Dairy and the Kamilaroi. These are all names of tribes of Australia. A child receives their mother totem by birth. So, your recruitment is through the mother's line. Because of the rule of exogamy, marrying outside one's totem, members of the same totem are often geographically dispersed. The second line of transmission of totem is the paternal line. In some groups like the Varamunga and the Mara, the totem is transmitted through the father. So, you get the totem which of your father, that is, it is a patri line of inheritance of the clan identity. In this case, the local group is primarily made of people with the same totem. The third category of transmission of the totem is the mythical ancestors. Among the Arunta and the Loridza, the child's totem is determined by the mythical ancestor who is believed to have a mystical impregnated the mother at the time of the conception. So, these are mythological stories which can be accepted by certain members of the community, and therefore, they believe that the totem was kind of transmitted from a mythical ancestor. So, when we look into these levels of kind of recruitment, it also helps us to understand the structure. So, we will need to look into the hierarchy and the structure, the connect, how they are related to each other. And for this, Durkheim identifies three primary levels of social organization that determine the totemic system. The first is the Fatri. And what is a Fatri? It is a group of clans united by a particular bonds of fraternity. Most Australian tribes are divided into two Fatri. In very commonsensical language, a society is divided into two Fatri, and then when the Fatris are further divided, they form clan. Other way around, we can say that when a number of clan members come together, they form a Fatri. Durkheim views that Fatri as an ancient clan that was broken up with current clans being the result of this dismemberment, that is, it is a kind of fusion has taken place. The Fatri is a higher level of social organization that encompasses individual clans. The second level of social structure which is significant to understand the totemic belief is the clan. And the clan is the dominant group in the collective life where members consider themselves as a single family based on shared name rather than the blood relation. And the third social structure are the marriage class or the matrimonial classes, which are subdivision of the Fatri that regulates marriage through generation alternation. Children belong to a different class than their parents or different generation than their parents, but the same generation as the grandparents. So, the alternate generations are kind of merged, and there are certain rules in terms of who can marry and who cannot. For example, among the Kamilaroi tribe, a member of the Ikbite class must marry someone from the Kubi class of the opposite Fatri. So, there is a matrimonial exogamous rule that is followed. Now, when we have understood the structure and we have understood the way in which the recruitment in the groups are taking place, it is now important to understand the meaning or the relevance of totem. For Durkheim, totem was first a name. He identifies the clan as the fundamental social unit characterized by two primary traits, a shared name and a bond of kinship. So, every clan had only one totem. What was the description of the clan? It was all members who shared the same blood. Therefore, it was a shared name plus a bond of kinship. Clan members consider themselves as single family, not because of blood relation, but because they carry the same name represented by the totem. The name of the clan is also the name of a specific species of material thing, usually an animal or plant known as the totem. Each clan has its own unique totem. Two clans within the same tribe cannot share the same one. And the second is to understand totem as emblem. The totemic name is acquired through specific rules of descent, most commonly through mother, that is the maternal line of descent, but sometimes through the paternal line and also through the mythical ancestor. The totem is not just a name, it is a visual symbol that distinguishes the group and its property. So, in Australian tribes, the totem is often engraved on ritual objects like the churinga, which Durkheim identifies as the most sacred object in the society. The totem is represented on the bodies of the clan members, just like tattoos or painting, but they are different because these are permanent, and there's no choice in terms of selecting the design or the art by individual member, because it is the same figure or the picture that is tattooed into everybody's body. All those who belong to one clan will have only one kind of totem. And then once a animal or a plant is a totem, there are certain rules of prohibition. Because the totem is sacred, it cannot be used for everyday consumption, and there are rules prohibiting the consumption of the animal or plant which is represented as the totem. Now we move to understanding the most sacred instrument in the totem tribe, and that is the churinga. Now these emblems serve as constant reminders of the clan unity and its connection to the sacred species. Among tribes like Arunta, the most sacred objects are the churinga, also known as tuzurunga. They are pieces of woodwork, polished stone engraved with a design representing the clan's totem. Some wooden churingas are pierced and attached to a string made of human hair or fur to be whirled in the air, and when they are whirled in the air, they produce a humming noise that accompanies important religious ceremonies. So, when we kind of also look into his understanding of the characteristic of sacred, Durkheim kind of mentions that what is sacred and apart from the profane is also associated with particular sounds. So, if we know in when in say in Hindu religion, there is a particular sound or certain mantra which is pronounced. So, these words, mantra or the noise which is kind of separate from the everyday hustle bustle carries a sacredness, it creates a sacred environment. So, here also the churinga, when it is whirled in the air, produces a humming noise that accompanies important religious ceremonies. The word churinga is both a noun and an adjective meaning sacred. It is used to describe highly secret names. There are kind of different names associated with every tribe. For instance, Arinta Churinga and the ritual acts like Ilya Chulinga. So, the Durkheim goes on into kind of giving a very descriptive analysis of these sacred objects. These sacredness of the churinga is to so intense that it creates a physical zone of protection and exclusion. Churingas are kept in the Irtana Lunga, a hidden cave or a desert location camouflaged by the rocks to prevent discovery by stranger. Now this takes us to the another characteristic of sacred identified by Durkheim is that something which is sacred and is not of everyday consumption needs to be protected. It needs to be kind of kept separately. Why? Because the profane always has a tendency to come close to the sacred, and the moment the profane comes close to the sacredness will be lost, and that is the reason why the sacred objects are kept isolated and protected from the everyday use. Women and uninitiated young men are strictly prohibited from touching, seeing or even approaching the Ertana Lunga, because again the people like women and uninitiated young men would be those who have not undergone the initiation ceremony. They are considered as profane. So, if they touch the sacred or the sanctuary in which the sacred is contained, then it will make it profane. So, the sacredness of the churinga radiates to the surrounding land, turning the site into a sanctuary. The Churinga has been described by Durkheim as having miracle virtues, that is, it kind of has certain kind of power in order to kind of create this environment of sacredness. The Churinga is not merely a passive symbol, it is believed to possess active supernatural powers that benefit both the individual and the species. And what are these powers? First is that it has a healing and physical growth. It is used to heal wounds, particularly those from circumcision, and is believed to make the beard grow. It also has psychological power. Churinga grants men courage and strength while simultaneously weakening the enemies. A fighter who sees his opponent wearing a Churinga may lose all the confidence, leading to certain defeat. And next is the Churinga also has ecological control. It ensures the normal reproduction of the totemic species, giving clan power over their namesake animals or plant. The Churinga also has the power of transmission. These virtues are spread throughout anno-tuning. Rubbing the Churinga against the bodies of the faithful or by whirling them so that the down covering them flies off in all direction. But the most important uh, characteristic of Churinga, the power, miraculous power of Churinga is that it acts as a collective treasury. Durkheim describes the collection of Churinga as the holy ark of the clan, representing the collective fate of the entire group. The loss of the Churinga is considered the greatest disaster that can befall on a group. When Churingas are lent to a foreign group, the clan enters a state of public mourning for 2 weeks, crying and covering their bodies in white clay as if they had lost a kinsman. While individuals may have rights over the specific Churinga, the entire collection is kept in the Irtanalunga under the strict guidance and consent of the group chief. So, basically it is kind of considered as a collective and sacred object that will protect the community and also reflects the identity of the community. Next, he talks about the source of sacredness or the totemic mark. Durkheim critiques the idea that Churingas are sacred because they are house-sent ancestral souls. Instead, he argues that the totemic imprint is the true source of their power. Durkheim argues that myths about ancestral souls were created after the fact to explain the religious respect people already felt for the object. Some Churingas are made by elders in full view of tribe and do not come from great ancestors, yet they possess the same sacred power as the ancient ones. In many tribes, there is no association with a Churinga and a spirit. So, Durkheim concludes that it is the totemic design alone, the image engraved or drawn on the wood or the stone, that sanctifies the object and distinguishes it from the profane. So, it is the same totem image which is on the body and the huts, walls of the huts and the weapons which is on the Churinga. So, it is that association with the symbol or the totem which is again kind of creating that sense of sacredness. Durkheim argues that the primary motivation for creating totemic art is not aesthetic or mimetic. The Australian does not carve or paint the totem to have a realistic portrait that allows them to visually experience the species. Instead, the representation arises from a fundamental human need to translate an internal idea into an outward and physical science. The actual appearance of the science is less important than its function as a marker for the collective identity and sacred concept of the group. Durkheim concludes that by writing the idea of the totem on the person and on various objects, the primitive is participating in the earliest form of social and religious symbolism. So, if we look into this discussion on the totemic principle as name and emblem, we have certain key takeaway which will help us to kind of have a comprehensive understanding of Durkheim's theory. First is the name. The totemism defines the clan's social boundary and creates a sense of kinship independent of biology. When we look into the totem as an emblem, then the function of totemic life is to act as visible coat of arms on bodies and objects, serving as constant reminder of the clan's unity. So, whenever one sees that image on the body or on other walls and tools, you are reminded that you belong to this particular clan. The third dimension is the sacred. And when we look into the sacred, then the totemic principle provides a physical locus like the chiringa for the religious power and creates a distinction between the sacred and the profane. The fourth is the source. When we look into the totemic belief, the source is of sacredness, or from where is the sacredness originating, and it kind of we have understood through Durkheim's theory that the source is not from the object or a myth, but from the totemic imprint itself. So, with this we come to the conclusion that by writing the idea of the totem on the person or various object, the primitive is actually kind of participating in a collective life. Durkheim argues that religious force is not a supernatural mystery, but the collective and anonymous force of the clan. Because a collective force is abstract and hard to imagine, the mind needs to attach it to a concrete object. The totemic emblem becomes the visible body of the god. And in that, to conclude, as already stated, that for Durkheim, it was the collective which was the important. And he gives his theories that society is God. What he actually meant is that when individual members of the society sacrifice the individual needs and maintain a moral order, then there is a arousal of a collective consciousness. And when this collective consciousness is found in the members, their sense of electricity, excitement, and this is the source of sacredness. And that is why he is saying that when we give more importance to the society, more importance to a collective moral order, we are being religious in our life. This he explains through the case study of totemism of Australian Aborigine. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.